From Old South Meeting House, live at some point, but not while you're watching it, it's Tea Party Tonight with Rob Crean. Presented by Revolutionary Spaces. With special guest historians, Bill Fowler, Benjamin Carp, and Chernoh Sesay. And now, your host, Rob Crean.
Welcome, thank you so much. Welcome to Tea Party Tonight. I am your host, Rob Crean. Thank you for being here. So, I'm standing here in the Old South Meeting House, which is where the meeting that led to the Boston Tea Party took place. Now, most years, the Old South Meeting House partners with the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum to do a reenactment of the Boston Tea Party. But, of course, because of the pandemic this year, that's not possible. And so instead, they're having me do this, which is hard to believe. I'm very excited for the opportunity, but I'm also a little bit scared. On behalf of everyone that's put this show together, I want to thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy what you see, please check out all of the great programming that Revolutionary Spaces is doing. And if you don't like it, Revolutionary Spaces got hacked. They had no idea we were doing this. The Boston Tea Party has been celebrated in Boston since the 19th century. Traditionally, on the anniversary, we would dump tea crates into the harbor. But in 1996, realizing that wasn't great for the environment, they substituted the tea with Governor Bill Weld. Who doesn't love the Tea Party? You know, all Americans love the Tea Party. It's a great story. All Americans, except, of course, super hipster historians that are like, actually, I'm more into the Stamp Act riots. So that is from my producer, Matt.
I just think the Stamp Act's cool.
And, they say that the tea dumped into the harbor, adjusted for inflation, would be worth about $2.7 million today. That would be like going to Fenway Park and dumping out 6 beers. It's an exaggeration, obviously. We actually did the math and we figured out that would be like going to Fenway Park and dumping out 12 beers. The beers are expensive at that baseball park is the joke we're going for. I hope it's landing. The Tea Party has inspired protesters for centuries. In fact, just 2 winters ago, the Earth itself adopted a variation when it dumped the sea into the tea. Speaking of the tea, the Old South Meeting House is actually on top of the tea station. The Old State House has an entrance to that same station underneath it. You might think it might not be that great to have trains going back and forth under 2 such old historic buildings, but evidently the tea never goes fast enough for it to do any damage. There's a lot of other really great historic sites around here too. Just around the corner is Spaniel Hall, sometimes called the Cradle of Liberty, often heralded as a free speech zone, yet I have been kicked out of the building numerous times for yelling fire, and once for yelling Yu-Gi-Oh! So it might just be the yelling. It could be an issue of volume. And it's just amazing to be performing in this room where so many great historic speeches have been given. John Hancock spoke here, John Hancock, of course, best known for his signature on the Declaration of Independence being bigger than everyone else's. And the reason that he signed his name so big was he signed first and didn't actually realize that other people were going to sign, so he didn't leave space for the rest of the signatures. Kind of like a 5-year-old writing a birthday card. And John Hancock also was well known for his flamboyant style, being extremely wealthy and not paying taxes. So in a way, he's kind of like a colonial Wesley Snipes. Only difference, of course, John Hancock never went to jail. Should have overthrown the government blade. And it really would be great if we could have an audience here, but we've got to be safe during this pandemic. I will say this is not the first pandemic that Boston has suffered through. In fact, around the time of the American Revolution, there was a smallpox outbreak here in Boston. They used to take pus-filled chunks of pox off of the infected and then insert them into open wounds of healthy people to inoculate them. Really makes wearing a mask seem not so bad, right? I can wear a mask as long as I don't have to have pus inserted into my open wounds. All right. And I hope you enjoy the show. I am very aware that it is not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Some people may be offended, but that's okay. You know, Boston has a long storied tradition of being offended. Why just around the corner is the Park Street Church. And in the 19th century, the Watch and Ward Committee was founded there. And there's actually a great exhibit about the Watch and Ward right over here at the Old South Meeting House. But the Watch and Ward, they oversaw literature and performances they felt were unfit for public consumption, because if there's anything God hates, it's books and theater kids. And on behalf of all of the book reading theater kids responsible for the show, I want to thank you again for watching. We have a fantastic show. We've got great historians as guests. We've got Bill Fowler, Chernoh Sesay, and Benjamin Carp, and a lot of other crazy stuff. It's going to be great. Thanks for watching. Our first guest is the sort of dean of Boston history. He's the professor of history at Northeastern University, former director of the Massachusetts Historical Society, and author of a stack of books on Samuel Adams, John Hancock, Silas Talbot, and the history of the American Navy. Please welcome Bill Fowler.
Thank you, Rob. It's good to be with you.
I appreciate it.
My great pleasure.
So you've written a lot about the history of Boston, and you've written about the people who were involved in the Tea Party. How do you think the story of the Boston Tea Party is significant, and its significance has changed over the years?
I was thinking earlier about kind of the children's books that have been written about the events of the American Revolution and the Tea Party. So I think that we tend to, as we get away from them farther and farther in time, we tend to romanticize them and imagine them as events that the participants themselves certainly do not understand the historical importance of what they were doing. And I think that sometimes they might be slightly amused about how we 200 plus years later look back and revere what they did, when perhaps at the time they really didn't quite understand the importance of the event that they were participating in.
Yeah, and I'm sure that probably just within the participants there was a wide variety of feelings on the impact of it.
Oh, I'm sure there were, Rob. I often think of events such as the Tea Party in history. The passenger list on the Mayflower, for example, all of the, it gets larger and larger and larger. I suspect by this time there are probably several 100,000 people who marched down to dump the tea in the harbor. So we have that tendency to exaggerate. We want to see history as we would like it to have been, rather perhaps than it actually was.
And also, I feel like there were probably a lot of people who were involved in the Tea Party that were there because they disagreed with the taxes or the monopoly. But I think probably there were some people that just thought it would be fun to throw some stuff in the harbor.
Hey, Rob, we do call it a party, don't we?
Yeah, it's true.
I think you're right about that to some degree in any case. I was thinking about the Tea Party. It strikes me almost like a football game. And that is, we begin the event with a rally. We gather everybody together in the Old South. We have speeches, and I'm sure they're chanting, how will tea mix with salt water, et cetera, et cetera. Then we go down to the waterfront. There are hundreds and hundreds of spectators just standing around watching to see what happens. The team goes on board the Tea Party vessels, throws the stuff in the harbor. And by the way, and I certainly don't mean to make light of this, but we should remember that nobody was hurt There was no one injured in the Tea Party. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why we can remember it so fondly. It's not like the terrible battles of the Revolution, certainly not like the Boston Massacre. It is, in fact, a party. So I often think of it, it's kind of street theater in a way. Much of what we sometimes see today, people go out in the street to demonstrate for particular causes, and it does become something of a party, something of jubilation. So I think, indeed, it does have that aspect to it. Maybe that's why we like to call it a party.
There were a lot of sort of rebellious disruptions in Boston,
Yes.
pretty severe destructions of property before the Boston Tea Party. What about the Boston Tea Party made it have the effect that it had?
What made the Boston Tea Party different was the reaction of the British government. I think what one can describe as a colossal overreaction of the British government. Violence in Boston, street violence in Boston, was not rare. I mean, it was an 18th century community, and in all urban areas here and in Europe and England, street violence, demonstrations, that sort of thing happened. I mean, it simply happened. Now, the Boston Tea Party, in many ways, was amongst the most respectable. Again, as I mentioned earlier, no one was hurt. The tea was carefully dumped in the harbor. And then I think most people in Boston who had participated, I'm not sure quite what they expected the British government to do, but they certainly did not expect them to react in such a harsh manner. It was a classic example of not understanding the environment and the situation. We can see that, by the way, even in our own time, when governments, sometimes state, local, federal government, overreact to demonstrations in the street, and what results, of course, are violent clashes. In this particular case, it wasn't violence that resulted. It was when the British government, the Parliament, and the Ministry passed a series of measures, the coercive acts, as they were sometimes called, the intolerable acts, which were so harsh and aimed directly at Boston, so that Boston became the great martyr. The cry was the frontier, the border of liberty is on the Charles River. That if we allow the British to continue to treat Boston in such a harsh manner, we will be next. Our liberties will be invaded. Our government will be arbitrarily changed. And so that's really what made the Tea Party special. The Tea Party itself was, I would judge, a relatively minor event. Again, a relatively minor event. It was the British government who exaggerated, blew it all out of proportions, and then instigated in a cascade. I suppose one might see the Tea Party as the beginning of a cascading series of events that grew out of control. And I think that's important to remember, that what happens after the Tea Party, things do really get out of control, both of the Americans, the colonials, and of the British government. And we just sort of tumble towards war, tumble towards revolution. And the Tea Party is the catalyst that started that movement towards war.
If there was one thing you could change about how Americans view their own history, what would it be?
Slavery. Slavery. It's so frustrating to me to see my fellow citizens misunderstand or refuse to understand the impact of slavery on our nation. To think that somehow slavery ended. So many of our fellow citizens believe in the Civil War. Slavery did, but the impact of it has not. Hundreds of years of slavery, and then 100 years, more than 100 years of discrimination. I want them to understand the impact of slavery on our society and how we today, 2020, benefit from the lives of slaves that labored for so long in our country. So to understand slavery is something that I think is not well understood and needs to be.
I have one final question that I want to ask you to wrap this up, which is, what are you working on now?
Oh, what am I working on now? Well, back to George Washington.
Oh,
yeah, he's kind of an evergreen, you know. He's interesting from all aspects. And as I've written before about George Washington, and read a good deal about him, of course, there's a part of his life that seems to be, if not ignored, historians generally just brush right over it. And that's the period of time from when he surrenders his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the American Army in 1783, and the time in April of 1789 when he takes the oath of office as President of the United States. So here we have about 6 years. And I'm just very curious. So what was George doing in those 6 years? And I found it to be fascinating.
Wow, that sounds very, very interesting. I'm excited to read it. It's always a delight to get to watch you speak, so it's been a real honor to speak with you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate it.
And I hope all of your viewers and listeners do embrace history. Be curious, ask questions, read books, go to reenactments, talk to people. It is a delight. It's been my pleasure for my entire career, and continues to be, by the way. So encourage people to do that. It's a great joy.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Professor
My
Bill Fowler.
pleasure. Thank you.
So obviously, drinking played a pretty big part in the American Revolution. We found out one of the most popular cocktails of the day was called Flip. Flip was a mixture of rum, molasses, nutmeg, raw egg, and hot beer. We thought it sounded disgusting, and so I asked a couple of the writers to try it with me.
I'm very excited to be making a colonial era flip. I have no idea what this tastes like. It looks like it's going to be kind of a darker eggnog, just as fun, even more booze. So I'm all about it. Got Sailor Jerry, not the darkest, but you know, it's not like Bacardi Clear or anything like that.
I have some Captain Morgan spiced rum, heyday from my college years.
2 tablespoons of molasses. I've got my preferred brand, Plantation Molasses, which has all sorts of historical connotations, which I'm not comfortable with, and you shouldn't be either, but we've got it.
We're gonna use that using slightly different things than Wes does.
Narragansett, keeping it colonial. Autocrat milk coffee stout on the stove.
Oatmeal stout here, cheapest I could find. Samuel Smith Old Brewery, it looks colonial and old to me.
I don't drink, so I'm using a non-alcoholic stout. For the rum, I'm using vinegar, which is a terrible idea.
I have got 2 large eggs.
I don't need eggs, so instead of eggs, I'm using applesauce.
Oh, we got lucky. There's a double yolk in here, so I have 2 eggs, but 3 yolks.
Yours might taste better than mine.
Once the beer is warm, you don't want it boiling, you just want it foaming and steamy. Once that is done, you pour that into the vessel containing the molasses and the rum, and then you take turns, you just flip. You, like the drink calls for, you just flip back and forth.
So I need to do exactly 3 ounces of rum. So like, I think this is 2 servings.
Definitely gonna feel,
I'm probably gonna get kind of toasted tonight. It's all good.
this is very rich.
I won't be intoxicated, but I will probably get sick.
Cut the middleman, get right to it, Rob.
2 tablespoons molasses. This is gonna be sweet.
I feel that if I put the beer in at this exact moment, it would scramble the eggs, so we don't want that.
Does anyone have the freshly grated nutmeg? That's like an important step.
I could have bought actual nutmeg, like the nuts, but I heard that they're incredibly difficult to grate.
I've grated them before and it wasn't too bad.
It was fine?
Yeah.
So I poured my beer over my molasses and rum.
Now, they say it's supposed to froth and steam. Is that correct?
Froth and steam, but not boil. So you want it to foam up, as it will when you heat beer, but you definitely don't want it boiling.
This just straight up looks like orange juice.
This is going to be messy. I can already tell.
It's already on me. Okay.
So in 1773, you would just go into an inn and ask for this, and they would know what you meant.
Yeah, and they would go through all this.
You got to tip at least $2 on this.
Oh, I've spilled mine so much.
So I don't know about y'all. I think I have scrambled eggs in this.
That was my worry. That's why you gotta hit it soon.
Wes, let me come over to your place to have them.
I'm a champion flip maker. Now I think I've got a little bit of scrambled egg, but you know when you're gonna get 3 shots in a beer, this is basically 4 drinks all in one.
Yeah, Rob, it looks kind of.
Looks to me like it's about as smooth as it's gonna get.
Wes, what does smooth look like for you?
Hard to quantify. You know, it's like art. You know it when you see it.
It's like pornography.
That too. Garnish with a little fresh ground nutmeg. There's a space there. Fresh ground nutmeg, not fresh ground nutmeg.
Is there any recommended amount of times you pour it back and forth, or is it just kind of
No, it's just until it becomes smooth. So it's a totally visual thing.
It doesn't look smooth to me, but
Well, you have applesauce in it, Rob.
I am gonna stop pouring. I'm gonna get some nutmeg, grind it like a fancy person, then hopefully have a great drink. All right, I got this thing here. I'm gonna grind it. Oh man, okay, all right. I dropped the nutmeg into my drink, so I'm gonna end it there.
That's extra right there.
Cheers
To
Cheers.
liberty.
to liberty.
to liberty.
That is not awful.
It's not bad.
I would never order it.
It's not bad.
And I will not finish all of this, I gotta say.
It does feel like a very warming drink. Like I could see myself drinking this when it's really rainy out. Rob, how is yours?
You can really taste the vinegar. If you replace the vinegar with rum and the applesauce with eggs, I can see how it could be pretty good.
If you used half the amount, and instead of a pint, you just used 8 ounces of milk, this would be a really good eggnoggy kind of winter drink. But the beer clashes so much with everything else that's going on in here.
I retrieved my nutmeg. Didn't want it to be too extra. I could definitely see like having milk. It does remind me a little bit of eggnog, and I think that's mostly just the nutmeg I put in. It's interesting. I could tell it will probably get me kind of drunk if I drink it. But it also seems like some trouble. Like if you ordered this at a bar, a bartender would stare daggers into you.
I think if I had used a premium oatmeal, it might have been better off. It's just the beer is too thin to support this, I think is what I'm feeling. I'm not going to drink it all, but there's a lot of booze and hence money in this, so I will drink a fair amount. This is what they pre-gamed the Boston Tea Party with. They just, before they dressed up in Native American blackface and went to go destroy the equivalent of $2.7 million worth of property. Just like, let's have a couple of flips, flipped, go flip some tea. I like it.
This is putting me in the mood to do some mass destruction. Yeah, I could
throw out a box of chai I have in my bedroom.
How does yours taste again, Rob?
It tastes like vinegar.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to double check.
It's not good.
Even if you don't like the taste, there's a lot of protein in here with 2 full eggs. But you're not even. It's just you just have nutritionless slop. I'm sorry, Rob.
I looked at the calorie content of this. This is like a breakfast beer, and then back in the day, the water wasn't always okay to drink due to bacteria, right? So like, I mean, I wouldn't put rum in it if I were having it for breakfast, but this might be a liquid for the day.
I lucked out with 3 egg yolks off of 2 eggs, so now I guess I kind of have to finish it. I'm gonna spite drink this. All right.
Drink and then like pump some iron. I feel like that's a pretty rocky thing.
You got all the ingredients to build muscle right there.
I think I already feel kind of tipsy. This is strong.
Every meal had booze in it, exactly as Kendra mentioned. Like, the water was just often not safe to drink. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, booze. In between, booze.
Yeah, it explains a lot of those riots.
Now I have a better appreciation for how the colonists got down. I would love to see what Samuel Adams would think of this 2 Black people and a vegan in 2020 making a drink dedicated to the abolition of tyranny. Cheers to the abolition of tyranny now and always.
Cheers to the abolition of tyranny.
Cheers.
Well, that's awful. That's really
I'm sorry, Rob.
really bad.
In case you're wondering how the rest of the night went, it ended with Wes Googling food poisoning, so drink with caution. We'll be right back. Our next guest is the Associate Professor and Daniel M. Lyons Chair of History at Brooklyn College in New York City, the author of Defiance of the Patriots, the Boston Tea Party, and the Making of America. Welcome, Professor Benjamin Carp.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So your book, you chose to write about the American Revolution using the lens of the Boston Tea Party. What made that a good focal point for you?
Well, the Boston Tea Party is this event that everybody has heard of, but only really know a kind of surface amount about. And there's all these interesting dimensions to it. I mean, one way you can look at it is they have this product, tea, that's from China, that's sold by this monopoly company that is taking over South Asia, right? It's mixed with a product, sugar, that's largely farmed by Caribbeans. It's only been drunk, tea has only been drunk by Europeans since really 1600, right? And then when they dump it into the harbor, they dress as Native Americans. So here's this kind of global story that's encapsulated in this event that's so important to Boston and the coming of the American Revolution, but it turns out to be all these other dimensions to it too.
Yeah, and that is it's something that you explore a lot in your book, is that, especially here in Boston, it's so often viewed and spoken of as being this very local story, the Boston Tea Party, but it really does have it have so much to do with things that are happening throughout the world at that time.
And the Bostonians were aware of that, right? They read about what was going on in India in their newspapers.
So there are a lot of supposed or causes of the Boston Tea Party. In your book, you talk about, I guess, about 4. What would you say were the main causes of the Tea Party?
Well, if you ask the average person what caused the Boston Tea Party, they say taxes, right? The tax on tea, which had been imposed not in 1773 under the Tea Act, but in 1767, right? And when the Townshend duties, right, put the taxes on tea, and all the other taxes were done away with in 1770, but the tax on tea stays. So yes, no taxation without representation. That's definitely the first cause. However, right, there are other causes too. There's an anti-monopolistic reason for the Boston Tea Party, right? The East India Company is a monopoly company. They are the only company that's within Great Britain and the British Empire that is allowed to transport tea from the Pacific Ocean to England or to the American colonies. There are other European companies that also sell tea, but that's, if Americans are drinking that, they're smuggling, essentially. So, you know, and what the Tea Act of 1773 did was made it easier for this monopoly company to be in the Americans' markets at a low enough, selling tea at a low enough price that they'd be able to crowd out all the smugglers. So that was going to hurt Boston smugglers, among other things. So there's the monopoly aspect of this too. Like, it's not just our pockets being picked through taxes, but our pockets being picked by this monopoly company that can then, once they've crowded out all other competitors, can raise prices on this commodity that we all drink to stratospheric levels. So that's the second cause. The third cause is kind of a minor one, but the revenue from the Tea Act, from the tea tax, was then going to be used to pay the salary of the governor and the lieutenant governor and some of the judges and things like that. And so, and those were exactly the people who were empowered to enforce these customs laws that the Bostonians hated so much. So it's like, to them, it's like this perfect system of evil, right? Not only are we paying the taxes, not only are we having to, prop up this monopoly, at our expense, but then the money that we're paying goes into the pockets of the people we hate because they're enforcing these laws that we don't like. So whereas previously those salaries were paid out of vote by the local legislature, which seemed to them to be a lot more constitutionally kosher and fair and all that. So those three things together are really bad. And then the other cause, that I found when I was doing this research is peer pressure. Since 1767, once those boycotts get online in 1768, Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, all these big cities had agreed, okay, we're boycotting these products from Great Britain. We're boycotting tea especially. We're not going to allow this legal tea from the hated British East India Company to come in. Everybody stick to that. But then in 1770, it all kind of falls apart. However, New York and Philadelphia, at least, just stop importing British tea. They hold to their boycott, but Boston doesn't. Boston kind of punks out. And so when the Tea Act is passed in 1773, the other cities are like, dude, you guys can't land this tea, or you're really going to look bad in front of the Sons of Liberty and all the other cities. You just have to prevent this tea from landing. So all the cities had to do this. So in New York, the tea is late, so this doesn't come up until January of 1774. In Philadelphia, they pressured the tea ships to turn around and go back to London, which was technically illegal, but it prevented violence from happening. In Boston, this doesn't work, so violence happens because the Bostonians feel that they have no choice. On the one hand, they don't want to land the tea and pay the taxes on it, but on the other hand, the governor and everybody won't let them send it back. And so the only place for the tea to go is into Boston Harbor.
Yeah, and it's a lot of tea. It's not.
Yeah, it's tons of. It's 46 tons of tea, I think. Yeah, it's a lot.
They say adjusted for inflation, it was like millions of dollars worth of tea, which is crazy to think of. That much goods being dumped into the harbor.
Yeah, it'd be worth at least a million pounds. I think I figured out that a ton of tea was equivalent to the cost of Paul Revere's house, right? Which, still stands and we can see it today. So if you think about a house in the north end of Boston and then multiply that by 46 times or whatever the multiplier is, I don't remember now, that's the level of value of what these faux hawks have just destroyed.
And speaking of the faux hawks, so the Sons of Liberty were dressed as Mohawks when they did this. But from what I understand, these weren't good costumes. They were kind of like Party City version of...
well, it depends, right? So it depends on how much of in the inner circle you were. If you were part of the planning of the Boston Tea Party from the very beginning, you had, not a great disguise, but like a somewhat better prepared disguise. If you were invited a little bit ahead of time because they knew you were a trustworthy guy, then you'd have like maybe a kind of Party City version. But some people were just asked, hey, join us like on the day of. And those people really just had time to kind of throw a blanket around their shoulders and smudge their face. I mean, it's basically an early version of blackface in a way. So you have varying levels of disguises on the night of December 16th.
Yeah, and the purpose of the disguises were mainly to just so that they wouldn't be recognized. Is it more symbolic?
I don't think so. I think it's an open secret. Everybody knows who these guys are. Nobody thinks. First of all, nobody thinks it's actual Indians. And second of all, I think it's a town of 16,000 people, fewer than a quarter of which were adult men. So you knew what your cousin, how he carried himself. You knew how your neighbor walked, even if it's dark and even if the guy's face is smudged. I think every spectator knew who these guys were. Some of them were from out of town, but for the most part, most of them I think were in-towners and everyone knew who they were. But what the disguise is supposed to say, it's supposed to say a lot of things. I think that there's deep symbolic meaning to the Indian disguises, but what the disguise is supposed to say is, you'd better not tell. And it's supposed to make this kind of claim of, it's not really Bostonians who are doing this, it's scapegoated outsiders who are doing this, because I think they knew on some level that Boston was going to be held liable for the property that was destroyed. And so they wanted to at least have this kind of fiction that everybody agrees upon, that these aren't really Boston guys. Right.
I will say though, I've been inside pretty much nonstop for the last year, I guess. And I'm at the old State House in downtown Boston right now. This is the first time I've really left my neighborhood in a really long time. And I will say, being out in Boston with people wearing masks, I was shocked at how many people look like they might be Mark Wahlberg. And I don't think many of them are, but it really, most Bostonians.
There's more than one Wahlberg, so there's
it's true.
There's room there. Yeah.
Thank you for talking with us, Professor Benjamin Carp. His book, Defiance of the Patriots, is available wherever fine books are sold.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Just around the corner, so we thought we'd take the time to showcase some of our favorite gift ideas based on Boston's rich culture and historic past in the segment we call Past and Presents. All right. Burn rubber for dozens of feet, travel at 7s of miles per hour, invent new curse words, and receive a bonus multiplier, all with Need for Speed. Boston, the beloved racing franchise, finally hits the Beantown streets. You'll experience the thrill of hitting every red light on Mass Ave. Features realistically rendered and accurately recreated levels such as the Tobin Bridge at rush hour and Storrow Drive on moving day. After moving 6 inches in 1 hour, you really will feel the need for speed. Are you constantly struggling with the rising cost of butter? You'd love to make your own, but it's so darn time consuming. Well, now there's the Cuisine Art butter churn. Bring the luxury and majesty of Plymouth Plantation into your home. Pilgrim sensibility meets modern convenience with this stainless steel, state-of-the-art kitchen appliance to meet all your churning needs. Choose from various settings, from solid to whipped to restaurant butter pad running. Cuisine Art lets you control your salt and cream outputs to find the butter that best suits your lifestyle. Don't have access to an electrical outlet? So many of us don't. Just use Cuisine Art's patented manual turn adapter. Attach the adapter and turn to your heart's delight using nothing more than good old-fashioned elbow grease. Don't be overwhelmed by the cost of butter again with a new Cuisine Art butter churn. Only $299.99. Manual adapter sold separately. Get your kids their 60 minutes of active time by having them play Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. Place the township markers and watch your kids compete in a race to warn the colonists of the impending invasion of the hated British. But don't pull the Dawes card, or you'll fall off your steed, bump your noggin, and be unable to complete the ride. Why have your children listen and hear the story of Paul Revere when they can live it? Old North Church and lanterns sold separately. Ever wish your child's clay creations could last forever? Well, now they can. With the Metal Fun Factory. The creative possibilities are endless as your child pours molten metal into molds of their tooth. Little Sam here is forging musket balls for the Patriots. Don't let the regulars find out. Each Metal Fun Factory comes with our patented 2,000-degree kitty forge, as well as pewter, silver, iron, and lead. Oh, take that out of your mouth, Adam. Metal Fun Factory. Polish your child's creativity. Capture the thrill and excitement of the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority with this true-to-life model train set. Painstakingly crafted to accurately portray the T, this model set comes complete with excessive numbers of passengers, malfunctioning card readers, and LED displays announcing unexpected delays in service. But that's not all. The MBTA model set is engineered to behave like the real T. Marvel in amazement as our scale model trains derail and catch fire. All while fare prices constantly increase. And just like the real T, the MBTA model train set automatically powers down after midnight. The MBTA model train set, on sale now. Warning, presence of MBTA model train set in home may cause neighboring properties to skyrocket. $159.99, subject to budget cuts. What better way to teach your child about the wonders of modern medicine than with this historically accurate apothecary set? Your kids will grind their herbs, mix their liniments and ointments, and concoct any number of tonics to restore their humors. Each junior apothecary comes with authentic healing herbs such as foxglove and belladonna. And don't forget the friendly leech. Why spend exorbitant amounts of money on brand name drugs when your little ones could mix up some blue mass? We even throw in the mercury for free. With Dr. Ogdenberry's junior apothecary, patience are a virtue. And finally, have a pesky child who won't clean his room, a husband keeps forgetting your birthday? The Home Tar and Feather Kit is just what you need to make an example. Featuring authentic pitch tar and limited edition feathers from the extinct North American passenger pigeon, your loved ones will have quite the laugh in between screams of agony. This Christmas, give them the gift that sticks. Boston Pasta Presents. Hope you get some of those under your tree.
I'm from Revolutionary Spaces, and we invite you to be part of the next generation of Bostonians to use this space, Old South Meeting House, to find community and hope in a time of crisis and loss.
After the Boston Massacre, when 5 men were shot by British troops on the night of March 5, 1770, the people of this city were devastated.
And in the years after, the community came here, to this meeting space, to listen to some of the city's most talented speakers remember the dead and the events of that night.
Time and again, speakers found ways to extend the meaning of these sacrifices to pressing events of the day.
Those speeches gave comfort to the grieving, and they also helped spark a revolution.
Speakers like John Hancock turned the community's shared memories of the massacre into a beacon, guiding us toward an impossible-sounding idea. independence from British rule.
Like Bostonians of 250 years ago, we too need to make sense of the tragedies and the losses today in our own backyards.
We invite you to speak here at Old South, or in places of strength and meaning in your own communities, this March 5th.
We do this not just to remember those we've lost, but to help us all, we the people.
We, the people.
We, the people.
We, the people.
We the people.
We, the people, to find strength to turn our own grief, our anger, our pain into a call for action and change.
We will broadcast a selection of taped speeches on this 251st anniversary of the Boston Massacre.
To learn more, please visit our website at revolutionaryspaces.org/March5.
We hope you'll join us, since remembering together as the founding generation knew has the power to make stronger the bonds that connect us.
Our next guest is the Associate Professor of Religious Studies at DePaul University, and as well as a great friend of Revolutionary Spaces. Please welcome Chernoh Sesay. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it. So the Boston Tea Party, of course, famously was started by a meeting that took place in the Old South Meeting House, a church. Churches obviously have a lot to do with colonial life. How do you think people might be reading things into that connection?
One of the aspects of that question is the relationship between religion and the revolution. And I think it's important to talk about religion in a very broad sense. Certainly we can talk about Protestant Christianity and then bring in Catholicism into that conversation. But if we think about the enslaved population, for example, that lived in Boston, if we think about somebody like Crispus Attucks and the fact that, this is somebody who had multiple cultures as part of his heritage, I think it requires that we expand thinking about religion to not just Protestant Christianity, but also, the religions, the cosmologies that the enslaved Africans would have brought with them to Boston. Now, having said that kind of broad introduction to religion, if we are thinking about Protestant Christianity and the ways in which we kind of read religion into the revolution or read religion out of the revolution, if we think about religion in some ways as kind of the subfloor for American society, one way to think about your question is on the one hand, that Protestant Christianity provides this subfloor for a kind of moral foundation for America. So kind of leading into the revolution, religion is something that helps people compromise. It's this social phenomenon that the founders are imagining will allow for there to be useful discussion in the midst of this revolutionary moment, and that discussion will help then frame a nation going forward. Another way of thinking about the significance of religion in the American Revolution is in some ways to kind of reverse the relationship. And so as opposed to this subfloor being something that really structures conversation and debate leading into the revolution, kind of another interpretation is to think about that subflooring as a surface that gets profoundly transformed. And so in this way of thinking about the relationship between religion and the revolution, several political ideas, secular political ideas, significantly transform the sources of authority and religious belief going forward, such that during the revolution and then coming out of it, the way in which people think about religion, the way they practice religion, the way they think about the relationship between religion to government is in many ways shifted.
In general, is history helpful to society? I would imagine as a historian, you would say it is, but can it also sometimes have a negative effect on society?
Yeah, I think the short answer is that history is really useful. I think one way to begin to open up that question is what we mean by history. And so one way of thinking about history is a certain platform of facts that are there, thinking about history in a kind of empirical sense. We have dates, we have archives, we can in many ways corroborate things that have happened in the past. But certainly, and any historian would agree that one of the things that drives professional historians is the aspect, the art of interpretation. And so if we think about historiography or the debates that historians have amongst themselves, and then we in many ways link those debates, the debates that historians have between themselves, and we link those debates to the ways in which various kinds of historical stories get taken up and become both part of myth and part of ideology, then absolutely, I think the history that historians do is really useful. And I also think that historians themselves are recognizing that the history that they do has to be in conversation with the way in which a broader public, if you will, is imagining the past and is talking about the past. And that if you allow a gap to open up between the work of professionals and the work of a broader public, I think the ways in which historians can influence various kinds of public debates becomes less. So, I mean, the Tea Party's funny because it's, after it happens, the founders wanted to ignore it. And here we are in the 21st century where you have some Americans who, in the way they're imagining that event and the events that led to it, they are imagining that it means something that speaks to contemporary concerns. And in the way they're making the Tea Party speak to contemporary concerns, they are certainly using many ideas that arise out of this revolutionary era. What does it mean to be a community? What does it mean to be an individual within that community? What's the responsibility of an individual to a particular community? Certainly, the meanings of those things are different today than they were during the revolutionary era. But it is really interesting and I think critical to think about also the continuities in these ideas about natural rights or ideas about kind of civic virtue and responsibility to some kind of greater whole.
Why should most Americans believe that the Tea Party or the revolution in general were important to them?
So it's a debate. I do think when I'm in the classroom, for example, trying to make the case to my undergraduates about the significance of the American Revolution, and also in some ways trying to convey to them why I became really interested in this era, I do think there's something to say about ideological continuity in history. I do think there's a lot that can be gained even in a kind of comparative framework. If you're interested less in terms of continuity over time, if you're going to look at the revolution and look at how people were talking about community and how they were talking about individualism, and to look at how over time important shifts have changed in how we think about the relationship of individuals to community, I think going back to the question that there's a lot to be said for thinking about history in terms of giving us an important perspective. And this isn't to say that historical work gives us a blueprint for the future, but I do think history can give us ways of, in reimagining the past, it can open up the ways in which we begin to imagine what's going on in our contemporary moment.
Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, this has been great. Thank you all.
In Minnesota, they have a term, Minnesota nice, being that people in Minnesota are viewed as being extremely nice and courteous. And the implication really is that people in Minnesota are nicer than people in other parts of the country. For instance, people here in Boston, and that's rubbish. We're very nice here in Boston, just nice in a different way, you know? We're the type of people that will tell you the truth, even if it's not right. We'll take the time to tell you when you're doing something wrong, because we're Boston nice. And that's
What, do you think you're better than me?
So in this game, I'm going to tell you 3 things which would seem completely outlandish in any other part of the country, but here in Boston, you hear and you say, makes sense. And 2 of them will be true. 1 of them will be a lie, and it's going to be the panel's job to discuss and decide which of the 3 options is, in fact, the lie. Ready to go? Our first round is colonial history. So tell me which one of these is not true. Option 1, street voting. To celebrate the commitment of a local customs official to his work enforcing anti-smuggling tariffs, the people of Boston volunteered to assist him in bringing his personal leisure boat out of Boston Harbor for the winter and even dried the ship off for him with fire. Option 2, free booze. Following a particularly lively town meeting, a local tavern popular with the townspeople ran out of ale, threatening to cause a riot. Men associated with the Sons of Liberty calmed the crowd by acquiring 4 pipes of Madeira wine and 10 casks of ale from a Boston coffee house, a popular tavern with gentlemen of the town, and didn't even bother asking or paying. And option 3, double tarring. Hearing news that the people of Portsmouth, New Hampshire had tarred and feathered a man with his clothes on, thus sort of defeating the purpose of tarring and feathering him, the good people of Boston took it upon themselves to tar and feather the same man again, this time without any clothes. So which of these 3 options do you think is the lie? Is it number 1, street voting, number 2, free booze, or number 3, double tarring?
I think it's number 2. My reason for this guess is that burning boats, dragging boats on shore and burning them happened in all sorts of places, and I am almost positive happened on Boston Common. And option 3, the tarring and feathering, I think that's a reference to John Malcolm, who was tarred and feathered in Boston in 1774 on the basis, and this comes up in Alfred Young's The Shoemaker and the Tea Party, because it was provoked by the diminutive George Robert XII's use. John Malcolm had the distinction of being hated in lots of colonies, because I think he was involved in the North Carolina business with William Tryon as well.
Well, I don't know. Getting tarred and feathered once is uncomfortable. Getting tarred and feathered twice is very uncomfortable. So I'm not certain. It would seem to me that the tarring and feathering twice is probably fairly extraordinary, even for John Malcolm. So I kind of think that tarring and feathering twice may be an exaggeration by 2.
Was Malcolm the one who brought like balls of his skin, like rolled with
yes,
copper, like
yes,
to show them,
yes,
you know, to show how much he had suffered on behalf of the king's service?
Yes,
well,
that was
I was going to say there's a wonderful recipe for those of you who might be interested in reenactments of tarring and feathering in Kenneth Roberts' Northwest Passage. So it's really quite delightful how they stir the tar, heat the tar. One of the difficulties was finding enough feathers, because particularly in the wintertime, they're a little scarce. So finding feathers was always a challenge. Finding the tar, that wasn't so bad, but finding the feathers, they really had to go and hunt for those geese.
Well, Bill, are you leaning towards number 2?
My guess was 2, because I don't remember a coffee house being deprived of its liquor, right? Private homes, yes, right? Like Hutchinson, they drank all his wine, but I don't remember that happening to a coffee house in Boston.
So what do you think? Can you come to an agreement on this, or?
I don't know. I think Ben knows this period better than I do, but
I haven't read Conroy's book in a while. And, I'm just throwing citations all over the place where people read all the good books about Massachusetts and Boston.
Sounds like your memory's pretty good on this, though, Ben.
All right, but my guess is 2. I really do think that that Malcolm was tarred and feathered twice.
I guess I'll go with Ben, but I think my fingers are crossed.
I could be wrong. I've been wrong before.
Oh, no, don't ever admit to that. Good heavens.
You are correct. Yes. Number 2 is the
Oh.
false one.
Poor John Malcolm, tarred and feathered twice.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have any skin left.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and you were saying he took the skin that came off of him with the tar,
yes,
and he brought
right,
it to the
right.
King of England and presented it to him and asked to be the commander of the army in the American Revolution. But the king's response was, I'm going to go with someone who's got skin. That's
Well, you have
that's not
to
true.
you have to admit though, John Malcolm put some skin in the game.
Absolutely. So round 2 is historical head trauma. So option 1, going clubbing. In 1769, Patriot leader James Otis was beaten over the head by a customs officer in a local tavern. This apparently started a cool new trend because just down the road in 1771, a man named Lendell Pitts was arrested for hitting a man named John Gray in the head with a club in a similar fashion after Gray played a prank on him in front of his friends at a tavern. And I don't know what kind of prank it was, if it was a whoopee cushion or a rubber spider, but it's a pretty harsh reaction. Option 2, Irish hello. Just after World War II, a boxer named Punchy walked into a bar called O'Keefe's and beat another boxer named Sully over the head with a lead pipe, splitting his scalp open and leaving his skull visible. After Punchy left, Sully, the guy with the skull, came to, ran into the street after him, and proceeded to beat him senseless. Punchy crawled under a car, and Sully lifted the car up, dragged him out, and punched him so hard he actually knocked his ear off. That's option 2.
Those do
Option
not
3.
sound like Marcus of Queensberry rules.
Yeah. And the third option is body in the burial ground. In 1997, a tree branch fell in the Cops Hill burial ground after a storm, cracking open a tabletop tomb, revealing the remains of a person. Well, that may not seem strange in a tomb. It was, because the body, according to North Ender Terry Verzoni, who discovered it on a morning walk, was wearing a Mo Vaughn jersey. The body was later identified as Brian Grady of Revere, and his head was cracked open with a club or possibly a souvenir mini bat. The crime was never solved. So, which of these do you think is the lie? Is it number 1, going clubbing, number 2, Irish hello, or number 3, body in the burial ground?
I read a bit about Pitts because I think he was involved in the Tea Party, but I don't remember that story. It's possible I just never came across it. The Otis story is true. Is said to have hastened his madness, although probably that's not very medically sound. But the Pitts story, I just haven't heard it,
The story about Punchy and Sully, those are stories I used to hear at family wakes, Irish wakes. So, sounds very, very familiar. I'm kind of skeptical about the Cops Hill story. It's an interesting place to put a body, I suppose. I agree with Ben about the Otis. Yes, that's quite true.
The Mo Vaughn detail is very specific. It's like how much work are the people at Revolutionary Spaces going through to make up these details, right? We got to try and aim this out.
But see, the Revere guy's body in Cops Hill, that sounds to me like a kind of typical Boston mob story, So I don't know.
I might go with 1.
Regarding the second story, if we're talking about 2 boxers, I was wondering why the first blow would have been had with an iron pipe as opposed to just duking it out with their fists.
Well, that's the usual thing you bring into an Irish pub in Boston in any case.
They use them as bathroom keys, right?
Right. You just never know.
Right.
I guess it depends on whether the boxer you want to attack is a better boxer than you. Really.
There you go. Right.
I'm going to go with 1, but I'm willing to follow you to 3.
I have faith, Ben. I have faith.
Yeah, and I'm with you in terms of the critical of the trend argument there.
Although that could be poetic license, seems to have started a trend. I get it. We all,
You're weakening, Ben. You're weakening. You're
weasel
weakening.
You're
weakening.
I'll still go with 1. All right, I'll stick to my guns on 1.
Okay. Those terms like seems like really are going to figure in here because I was a tour guide for many years, and I told the number 3, the story of the body in Cops Hill burial ground many times, but always starting with supposedly legend has it or it's been said. That is the false one. And it is,
Bill, I'll be on with you.
Yeah. If you ever take a tour and the tour guide says supposedly, enjoy the story, but don't believe it. Round 3 is monumental mistakes. All right. Option 1 is Fairweather Town. In 1774, a small community in central Massachusetts decided to name their new town after one of their favorite colonial residents, the beloved governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, Thomas Hutchinson. The community remained Hutchinson, Massachusetts for a whopping 2.5 years, but by 1776, colonial America had canceled Thomas Hutchinson and exiled him forever to England, and the town renamed itself after a supporter of the American colonies instead. It's option 1. Option 2, white power plaque. This is not about dentistry. Just outside of Rosendale Square on Washington Street, there stands a monument to the late Boston City Councilor Albert Dapper O'Neill. O'Neill, who served in World War II and as a Boston City Councilor for 25 years, was also an open supporter of a white nationalist group and thought racial integration was a communist plot against Boston. The monument was erected in 2009 and claims to have been erected by the people of Boston. And option 3, mean art. In front of 15 Easton Street in Lower Alston, lifelong resident Erin Harris builds a new monument every year to her neighbors. Specifically, she chooses the college student she finds most obnoxious throughout the school year and makes a life-sized model out of paper mache. She then lets it wither and rot on her front porch from June through August and then leaves the remains in front of the offender's house on Labor Day. So, which option do you think it is? Option 1, Fairweather Town. Option 2, white power plaque, or option 3, mean art.
Option 1 is true. So that one can't be the right answer. The O'Neill one, right? How racist do we think Boston is that story would be true? And then, number 3, I don't know, that one's wild.
Dapper O'Neill was a complete nutcase. Just a complete nutcase. Although he was very entertaining. You could go to city council meetings and listen to the Dapper, as he was called. He used to, by the way, before it was fashionable, he carried a gun into city council meetings. But in any case, erecting a monument to Dapper O'Neill seems really, if that's true, I'm going to run and hide.
Paper mache, TPing people's houses. Maybe it's possible.
That one could be like having the paper mache sculpture that you then allow to deteriorate as an art project and then leave the remains at the offender's house. That actually sounds plausible, right? I've been to Somerville Open Studios. Like, you see a lot of creativity in the Boston art scene. I kind of want that one to be true. I want the O'Neill one to be wrong. The people of Boston.
I would also want number 2 not to be true.
Yeah.
Bostonians take their history seriously, I tend to think. So somebody like that standing out would, I think, attract attention. I'm going to go with number 2.
I'll support you.
I need another drink.
Yeah, you're going to need another drink for the answer because number 2 is correct. It is in front of the Knights of Columbus in Rosendale. Number 3, which is the most positive one, is the one that is not true. Thank you so much for playing this game. I hope you had a fun time. I'm sorry, we did end on a little bit of a down note, so I apologize.
And we were only 1 for 3. We did terribly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys lost. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Rob.
I feel bad. I didn't
really. You've really put Boston and historians in a good light, haven't you? 1 out of 3, and then the racist Dapper O'Neill. This is really okay. What are you going to do with this video? Huh?
Well, thank you so much for joining us for the games.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Have a great holiday, everyone. And thank you for arranging this. Take care.
Thanks. Same to you.
Great seeing everybody.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Be good, all. Be good.
Thanks so much.
Well,
I appreciate it. Our next segment is from a friend of mine who is not only a hilarious comedian and a great writer, but also a 3-time Jeopardy champion. Ladies and gentlemen, Wes Hazard.
The Boston Tea Party. Here's some sundry facts from me. All right. First of all, they were not being subtle about it. My entire time I've ever thought about this, it was like this dark, clandestine midnight thing. No, it was very, very obvious, okay? They destroyed 342 chests of tea, 360 pounds each, about $2.7 million in 2020 money, and that takes a lot of effort. They had to hoist it up from the ship with ropes and pulleys. It's not just guys walking down below deck and carrying up the arms. It's like these are massive chests, so a lot of people. It takes axes and crowbars. It's the dead of night. It's the 1773 Boston. There's no electric hum, there's no music, there's no planes, there's no traffic, anything like that. Could be heard for miles around, miles, and a crowd of 1,000 showed up to just watch it. So they were very, very blatant. They knew that this was going down. The entire town knew this was not some midnight raid, and it took 3 hours. 3 hours. That's how long this operation took. You could have watched the entire second Lord of the Rings movie in the time that it took them to break the law for this long. That is wild. Also, people knew the British admiral of the Navy in Boston. He was watching it from his quarters, and there were gunboats surrounding them that could have fired at any time and broken it up. But the admiral said, "I could have easily prevented the execution of this plan, but must have endangered the lives of many innocent people by firing upon them," which is amazing. I like the restraint. That is something that no American police chief has ever said. The British, not all bad. Okay. Also, they were done by 9 p.m. This was, again, ridiculously. The people lived by the sun at that time. They got home in time to watch Grey's Anatomy. That is crazy. Also, they were disguised as Mohawk Indians, and it was sort of a tribute. All right, so they had the disguises. No one believed that they would actually be mistaken for Mohawks, but they were doing something hella illegal. You could be hanged for what they were doing, so they knew that they had to disguise their identities, and also this gave a signal to everybody else that you better not snitch, and no one did. They were very tight-lipped about it, but I found that the reason they had chosen Mohawk tribute disguises were because they felt that the Native American symbolized liberty and America itself. That was something that I did not know. Just quick word to the wise, white people never dress in brownface, blackface, any kind of stuff like that. Definitely don't wear headdresses and put suit on your face. If you want to look cool while breaking the law, white people, there is a well-established pattern for you. It is Reservoir Dogs. Basic two-piece black suit, tie, glasses, you look awesome, so much cooler. About that, the American Indian had long been a symbol of liberty for the colonists. Paul Revere used Indians in his engravings to symbolize the new American nation. So this was a widespread sentiment, which is odd because, I mean, what? Do you know colonists, Native Americans didn't generally mix so well? Yeah, a quick recap of Native American-European relations in coastal Massachusetts and New England during the time, mass death. All right, before Plymouth was even established, something like 50 to 90% of the native population had been decimated by smallpox. All right, things are already not good. But despite that, Massasoit, yeah, the guy, the leader of the Wampanoag, not the community college in Brookline, he saved their asses. Hence is the tradition of Thanksgiving. He entered into a peace treaty with the Plymouth plantation against the Narragansett. He is entirely responsible for them for surviving for those first few harsh winters. He really held it down, even though half of his people were already dead because before they even got there due to diseases that their precursors brought. Things are relatively okay before Massasoit dies, but then in 1662, his son is accused of collaborating with the Narragansetts and arrested by the Plymouth Bay Colony. They keep him there, and before he is released, he dies of sudden illnesses. Okay, yeah, it goes back. Sandra Bland, not the first. This often happens. They have a history of doing this, and this is one of the precursors for the Great War that's coming up. His name was Wamsutter. Not only was he killed, but they also now market his name with sheets and matches, so there you go. His brother, Wamsutter's brother, Metacom, aka Metacomet, King Philip. He launches the King Philip War in 1675. This is brutal. Does not get a lot of play in history books, but 1 in 10 men of European descent in New England were killed. Per capita, it was the bloodiest military event for white people on North American soil ever to this day. But it's way worse for Native Americans. 3 times as many casualties, several hundred sold into slavery, and several tribes lose their land completely. Okay, King Philip's War. And so this is the image that you get. It's, colonists holding Indian's head on a pike. Just odd that you would choose them to then be like, that's us, liberty. Odd. Also, this is Metacomet. This is a picture that Paul Revere himself engraved for a book, a memoir about the guy who led the party that killed Metacomet. Kind of weird, a little bit meta. No, they were imitating this. This is the most popular image of Native American in these people's minds at the time. They were going for this, but also, let's admit, Paul Revere kind of sucked at art. This is his seal from Massachusetts a couple years later. Not very good. But I digress. Back to the Tea Party. Again, you can't can't stop white guys from dressing up as other cultures if they get into it. And there's a lot of representation. Some are serious, some are a little bit comic. This one is very dark, looks like a Lars von Trier movie kind of. This one, he's saying white power. Like in my mind, he's saying white power. I can't prove it, but I feel that. This is just blackface, all right? This guy has one feather in his hair, and the rest is just like, yeah, we put some suit on his face. That's kind of weird. And this is the worst one. It's a white guy dressing up in Native American garb, and then you have a very Sambo-like figure. This is just double racist, okay? So, 3 ships were carrying tea in Boston Harbor that night. They were the Eleanor, the Dartmouth, and the Beaver. Okay, but there were more. Those were just part of a 7-ship group that had left England in September. Other ships going to Philly, Charleston, and New York City. None of those ships had their tea landed. All the captains were either intimidated, it was impounded, or it was sent back to England. 4 ships went to Boston. 3 I mentioned. 1 didn't quite make it. We had the last ship named the William. Okay, this is kind of crazy. It's carrying 58 chests of tea. It gets caught up in storms right off, and it founders before the tea party even happens and washes up on the rocks of Provincetown. The tea is saved and removed, but 2 chests go to Cape Cod. It ends up getting destroyed, and the Sons of Liberty hunt it down. They are relentless. Any tea, whatever. They went and got the shipwreck tea. That's how serious these guys were about it, all right? And it was mostly destroyed. A little bit did get sold. But there was a whole second tea party, months later. So Boston Tea Party, December 16th, 1773. March 7th, 1774, the Sons of Liberty once again raid a different ship, the Fortune, in Boston Harbor and destroy all 28 of the chests of tea that it was carrying. In case you're wondering, yes, they also played dress up again. They were really, really committed to that. Kind of crazy that there's an entire second tea party that no one ever talks about. This is just a very disturbing political cartoon of a teapot. I have to see it. You have to see it. We move on from there. So this is why we can't have nice things. Tea, as a result of the Boston Tea Party and continuing events, tea goes out of favor. It had been all the rage. Before this, 1.2 million pounds of it were imported every year to America. Now it's basically the stuff that you get from your grandmother if you're having a sick day. And yeah, it's just like, this is why we can't have nice things. Also for rum. Rum was the #1 spirit in America before the Revolution. After this and the War of 1812, we lose access to the British Sugar Islands, and thus now whiskey is, even Fireball, is the #1 spirit in America. So that is a quick history of the Tea Party and scene. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Wes. That was great. We'll be right back. Well, that's our show. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks to all of our guests, Bill Fowler, Chernoh Sesay, Benjamin Carp. Thanks to all the writers, for Matt for working on the show. Thanks to Revolutionary Spaces. Check out revolutionaryspaces.org to find out more about their programming, and hopefully we'll see you next year. Thanks a lot. Thank you. You're the hero.